Hello there, and welcome to Hugh's Reviews, the place for movie views and spoiler clues. The king of Boom is back. Christopher Nolan brings more loud, pretty things to the screen with Tenet, a movie about people who can move backwards or forwards through time so Nolan can shoot cool action stuff looking weird. In keeping with the theme of the film, I'll get the end out of the way at the beginning and say that I did not like this film. Maybe it was because somebody at my theater decided to let their kid play Spaceship with the sound settings, but every punch, gunshot, footstep, spasm-inducing orchestration, and boom was physically painful, and every line of dialogue was so muffled as to be incomprehensible. It didn't help that nearly every actor in the movie skipped enunciation during acting school and mutters their lines, half of the time while wearing breathing masks. You know how you have a hard time understanding the checkout clerk while he's wearing his cloth COVID mask? Now imagine he's wearing a plastic respirator, has an accent and a speech impediment, and someone's setting off cherry bombs 3 inches from your eardrum. Good times. But even granting that the sound settings being woefully mismanaged may have been detrimental to the experience, the movie itself is kinda awkward. Nolan has for years been leaning ever heavier on spectacle over real substance. His visual style is breathtaking, and his movies usually look amazing, except maybe in this case, but I'll get to that. With Tenet, Nolan shows the truest example of how he starts with a cool visual trick and then wraps a script around that like a newspaper around a fish. The visual trick he chose this time around was having time run backwards and forwards at the same time. If that's a confusing sentence, then you'll get a migraine from the movie itself. It was pretty neat at first, though it is a little unsettling, which was probably the point, but there's only so many times you can see someone hit reverse on the DVD before it becomes old hat. After you're used to the visuals, the script needs to be engaging enough to carry your interest, and Tenet, just like Interstellar and Inception, fast talks layer after layer of pseudo-intellectualism and exposition at the audience in an attempt to make you think the movie is smarter than it is. It's hard to follow while it's happening, and that fools you for a bit, but once the credits roll and you have a second to breathe, you realize it's kind of shallow. I'll give credit where credit's due. Choreographing everything forwards and backwards must have been insanely difficult, but they thought more about how they'd film it than whether or not it would be compelling. Sometimes it's a real heart-thumping ride, and other times it kind of looks silly. Nolan must have not looked too hard at the dailies other than to try and edit out the less lackluster seconds, because the effect as it stands comes across as a more of a can we pull this off than does it actually service the plot. A creative move forward in visual storytelling that, to my mind, wasn't as impressive as the effort put into making it happen. For all the time they spent explaining the rules of time inversion and exhausting themselves to bring it to silver screen life, they forgot about some pretty basic stuff when convenient. For instance, how does a time-inverted car drive? Not just because of the mind-twisting thought of it gaining gas as it drives, or the numerous problems with how the gears would function, but at one point they explain that thermal reactions are also inverted. Stuff that should be hot becomes cold, and cold stuff becomes hot. So, how does an internal combustion engine fire? Wouldn't it just freeze instantly? Wouldn't their bodies have heat drawn out of them steadily as time passes backwards? Wouldn't food and drink pass back up their internal systems until they chew it backwards and it sits whole on the plate? And not to get too gross, but I don't even want to think about how going to the bathroom would work. They can't breathe the air of normal time because it's being processed forward as they move back. Okay, so how do they process food, water, and so forth? And how does one character set fire to gasoline only to have it freeze what he's setting on fire? Wouldn't the gas itself freeze rather than burn at all? For that matter, how do bullets fire in forward motion in inverted time? Bullets require a thermal reaction to ignite the gunpowder and propel the projectile. So any bullets not brought through the same process as our heroes and villains would jam the gun instantly. But they don't. Can you see the problem here? And when John David Washington and company are traveling backwards in time aboard a ship and he goes out on deck to exercise, etc., does no one on board ever question the dude walking backwards wearing a respirator, or as he takes down or erects an oxygen tent? Plus, I can only imagine the weird phone calls the cops got during the heist halfway through. Yeah, hey, there was this car and it was laying in the highway and it kind of uncrashed itself and started driving like a bat out of hell backwards and stuff. Not to mention the single dumbest security team ever not realizing that when they drove onto an apparently abandoned stretch of road and 4 heavy-duty trucks hemmed them in from all sides, that maybe there was an issue. Something they don't bother to think about until they are literally being shot at. That's what happens when you hire plutonium transport off Craigslist, guys. You get what you pay for. I once saw an episode of the British sci-fi comedy classic Red Dwarf, where a similar concept was explored in side-splitting detail. And I have a sneaking suspicion that Nolan did too, but he decided to be dramatic where they went for silly. And both are equally as confusing and goofy, in spite of their disparate tonal intent. This all could have been ignored, and I might have found the film more engaging if I cared about the characters. But I didn't. They're all kind of boilerplate and lacking depth. Washington is the flawless hero, who even refers to himself as the protagonist throughout the movie. I don't think he even has a real character name. He's just a dead slate. He has no character flaws, you don't know anything personal or real about him. He's action man, good guy. Robert Pattinson is introduced as the jaded sidekick Neil, whose name was mumbled so badly I thought they were constantly saying Neo, like The Matrix Neo. He's drinking away his past, a man with terrible secrets and dark memories. That could have been really interesting given Pattinson's stellar thespian chops, but that's done away with after a few minutes and he becomes as one-note as the rest of the cast. Elizabeth Debicki plays the battered wife to Kenneth Branagh's diabolical Andre. She is every abused spouse in every poorly fleshed out film ever, also blameless, flawless, and boring. Her emotional touchstone is supposed to be her young son and how she longs to escape her husband's clutches, but of course she can't because he's so scary and evil. You might be tempted to feel something for her and her little boy, but the kid literally has no lines, and he's never in a scene with his mother long enough for you to get an emotional connection between them. The audience has to be told how much she loves her child because we never see it on screen. Meanwhile, Branagh apparently saw Jeremy Irons in Dungeons & Dragons and thought, I can chew more scenery than that! He's so over the top that instead of being scared of him, I almost laughed out loud. He takes every opportunity to scream, beat, abuse, and kill, and monologue about his evil schemes and how wicked and scary he is. Every word out of his mouth is some version of, I am a scary bad man doing scary bad man things. A good villain is layered and subtle. This guy was a step away from twirling a fancy mustache and saying, bwahaha. Alright, but this is Nolan, so we know we're here for the spectacle. And in spite of obvious effort being put into the display, I was still kind of bored. Because of the gimmick, we see the same action scenes played out from different perspectives in both forward motion and reverse. Kinda cool, but the editing and the camera work made it a little hard to follow at times, and even though there were supposed to be time shift surprises and twist reveals, I had them figured out long before they were revealed. It steals a bit of the punch when nearly every twist has a moment where the movie focuses very specifically on a particular object, person, or line of dialogue, and all but puts up a big neon sign that says, "This will be a twist later." And when your movie has a limited cast and a narrowed focus, it's not hard to figure out what that twist will be, even without trying. Nolan tried to be extra clever by including inventive music and sound choices. When time is running backwards, the sound effects move backwards with it. That's not too impressive given modern technology, but it was an extra layer that added to the surreal nature of the action, and it was appreciated at first. The music choices, on the other hand, the way the music also ran in reverse was a move that might have seemed like a good idea on paper, but when it hits your ears, it's jarring and uncomfortable, like nails on a chalkboard. And it's all some form of high-pitched staccato screech or bass bombs, thuds, or bangs, and since there's already so many sharp sounds, punches, explosions, and gunshots going off, when the reverse-style music is overlaid, it's a cacophony of competing noise. I think that even if the sound system in my theater had been properly adjusted, my eardrums still would have become numb after the first half hour. Good sound design moves and flows, drawing the viewer unconsciously into the film's world. The sound design in Tenet insists on itself, like an attention-starved toddler banging a pan. Meanwhile, music should complement what's happening, not fight with the noise. I'm just not sure how Nolan keeps getting away with this, but I think it has something to do with the speed at which the average human brain processes information. I found out after my viewing that it wasn't just my theater that had sound issues. Numerous people from all over the world are reporting the same problem. It turns out the incomprehensible noise was intentional. Given Nolan's style, this makes sense. The more noise that fights for attention, the less the human brain can process at any given moment. Like when you have to turn down the radio to look for a street sign. You have to focus intently, giving all your attention to the moment before you. The next recognizable sound, like listening to a friend in a crowded club. You don't have any processing power left over for analysis of the whole until things begin to slow down and get quieter, like when you step outside the club to have a real conversation. But with Tenet, everything is moving too quickly to give you that breather. So between your laser focus on the words being said at the moment or on the action at that exact second, you are rarely given the chance for a comprehensive overview. And that's how Nolan tricks his audiences. If you say smart-sounding things fast enough with enough distracting noise surrounding the light-speed pretty pictures, you can trick most people into thinking you are as intelligent as you're pretending. And while the actors were talented enough to look like they believed their ham-fisted dialogue, it didn't work well enough to make me believe it. I just couldn't stop looking at their lifeless faces, their tired eyes, and wondering why I should care or shut out the combative and painful soundtrack well enough to ease into their world. Nor was I as distracted enough by the bludgeoning I was receiving to ignore all the problems the film obviously contained. I am not usually one of those people who dismisses Nolan as a showy hack, and I have enjoyed his work over the years, even if for no other reason than to wonder at his work ethic and visual accomplishments. But Tenet stole away most of that goodwill. Even the legendary Michael Caine shows up for 5 minutes to get a check, and he even looked bored, disinterested, and tired. A premise and a gimmick that would have made for an impressive short film or a music video is stretched painfully out over 2.5 hours. And given the other issues with the movie, it overstayed its welcome by a long shot. It's a loud, uncomfortable, emotionally unengaging amusement park ride from a director who needs to dial down the bloat and find a script to get excited about instead of a gimmick. I'm sure it'll get a nomination for editing or cinematography, but it's not worth waiting in line and going to a theater during a pandemic. If the Nolan spectacle parade hasn't worn thin with you yet, then you might enjoy it, but save yourself the trouble. Stream it at home. And that is it for now from Hugh's Reviews. As always, I'd like to thank our underwriters at Moons of Vega Photography and Slice Print Roleplay. Look them up, check them out, tell them Hugh sent you. They are amazing. If you've got any suggestions for upcoming movies you'd like me to review, send me a line at WXPI Radio of Williamsport, drop me a line on YouTube, or, hey, just send out good vibes and maybe I'll get 'em, man. As always, happy viewing.